Good evening. My name is Odie Hawkins.
Hello, Odie Hawkins.
And I'm going to be reading short stories and essays. Once again, it's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday.
And we decided to carry this these readings on from Monday to Tuesday. So I'm reading on Tuesday evenings now. I need to get that straight in my own head.
Got it.
Because sometimes it's Thursday in my mind, or Monday, or some other day, but it's Tuesday.
Yes, so we have a calendar nearby.
Yes.
So.
My co-conspirator and director and lovely woman, my wife, Zola Salena, is the voice you hear. And at some point in time, over the course of these Tuesdays, I'm going to have her join me here so that we can read something jointly.
Okay.
The reasons why we're doing this, one of them is to try to carry on, as the English say, you know, in spite of all of the horrible things that are going on the earth. We feel we need to preserve some sense of normalcy by doing things that people might ordinarily do in normal times.
And our ancestors would agree that that's what elders do. They help us,
especially in this place.
Yes, they help us carry on.
You got that right. We call our little thing moments in time, and hopefully that's what they will be, moments in time. I'm going to read a series of stories that encompass all of what my life has been about as a writer. Some of the things will be very personal, some will be impersonal, some will be speculations and creative efforts to look at the world as we see it these days. I'd like to start off. Incidentally, this is going to be a little short reading, not long drawn out thing, so no one need to worry about how will I go to sleep. I'd like to start off this particular sessions with stories, a very personal story about being in Africa. And it's very personal, I said. I made a trip first time to Accra, to Ghana in 1992, right after they had the Los Angeles Police Department tried to beat Rodney King to death. I had already bought my ticket, so I wasn't fleeing anything. I decided to go, but what was most memorable about that occasion is that as we wheeled out on the airplane, you could see the smoke rising from LA, and I had doubts about whether or not the place would still be here when I decided to return. In any case, I made a deal with an ancient magazine called Players. Players magazine was owned by the same people who own Holloway House Publishing House. And I called the series that I wrote The Players' Diaries. We arrived at a deal, and I would send pieces from Ghana to Players, and this is the first in the series. I'm calling it The Players' Diaries. The two words that you see right here, Mimba.
One moment, please. M-I-B-A.
M-I-B-A. In Ga, which is one of the major languages in Ghana, it means I'm coming. And you don't pronounce it me or ba, but Mimba. Remember, you hear it all the time. Someone says, you go to the post office and you're waiting, and you ask the clerk, you know, can you give me some stamps or something? And she says, Mimba, I'm coming. Somebody is telling a story in the local bar, and he's sort of, you know, telling a kind of lousy, slow motion story, and somebody says, you know, come on, hurry it up. And he says, you know, Mimba. So, here I go. No matter what you think a journey back to your ancestral homeland might be like, it's nothing compared to the journey you take inside of yourself once you get there. I'm sure that holds true for people who go back to Italy that their grandparents came from, or the Poles, or anybody, anywhere. Mimba, pronounced Mimba, are the Ga words for I'm coming. Ga is one of the principal languages in Ghana, West Africa, along with Ewe and Twi. Accra is the capital of Ghana and the ancestral home of the Ga people, who are reputed to be descendants of a migration from Egypt centuries ago. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I have written a 2-part journal about living in Ghana that I have entitled Mimba. The term Mimba covers a collection of circumstances and grounds. Let's say we're having dinner at the Country Kitchen, one of the really good restaurants in Accra. I'll drink to that.
I'll drink to that.
And our favorite waitress says, Mimba, I'm coming. As she goes away to do something else. It would probably mean that she will get back to our table shortly, or it could mean that she's finished for the day and we'll see us tomorrow, or next week, or in heaven. Mimba, the storyteller in the local Apeteshi joint, will say when the bar lady begins to nudge him for payment of his drinks, and his audience begins to urge him to tell his story more quickly. Mimba. It's usually said when someone is being delayed by something or other, or it can have other connotations depending on the tonal values used. I'm not there yet, but I'm coming. Mimba. I take full responsibility for the warts that will appear and the fevers that may occur as a result of my opinions. Mimba. There was a lot to think about as the plane circled the smoke rings of the 1992 riots. Everybody on the plane was aware of where we were coming from. There had to be. The blessing out of officers Bresino, Wynn, Powell, and Kuhn had triggered a firestorm. We had patiently watched. Reverend Cecil Murray shed tears. What the jurors reviewing the Rodney King tape were thinking can only be understood by knowing how natural racism is to American justice. I stared over my left shoulder at the gentle gray smoke curling up from south central Los Angeles. A few of the newscasters had completely blown their coos. They're savages! That's the only word that fits them. Jerry, how could they do this to our city? Tom, my God, who are these people? Sally, can you give us some idea of what the problem is with these people? They didn't get it. Never have. Never will. Meanwhile, on the great greyhound in the sky, I studied a double layer of expressions. Some African Americans were happy that the brothers and sisters had come down front with their feelings. What were we supposed to do? Bury our heads in the hood? A few upper pedigreed middle-class types, formerly Negro-centric, marched up and down the British Airways aisles, Bloody Marys at port arms, daring Europeans to challenge their defense of the riots. plane was kind of tense. And fortunately, there were no challenges. We rode on and on and on and on. I couldn't push the thought away. We left in chains. We were returning with credit cards. Of course, I had always wanted to go to Africa, specifically West Africa, because of my gene pool connections. That's the way most of us feel, I think, sometimes. Forces beyond our control act on us to make the move. That was the feeling in me. I stared down at the Atlantic Ocean for hours. I cried a few times, not even realizing that tears were coming from my eyes until the clouds began to blur. I felt sentimental. But I wasn't going to Africa to discover myself, to find my roots. As far as I was concerned, Alex Haley had taken care of all of that for me. And my strong family background had laid the foundation for a solid understanding of who I was. We are Africans in America. Africans, Americans, you understand? I was instead being pulled over to write about the experiences that an African-American man with his brains and libido intact would have in the motherland. There were hours when I didn't think we would ever make it. Hours in the clouds when the plane wasn't moving at all, or so it seemed. And finally, the announcement that we were landing in Kano, Nigeria, for half an hour before arriving at our destination, I stood in the doorway of the plane feeling the heat from a skyborne blast furnace. Ooh, feeling the heat from a skyborne blast furnace, looking down at the small group of African Americans who had dashed down the gangplank the minute we rolled to a stop, to set foot on the soil of Mother Africa. Maybe I would have tripped with him if it hadn't been for the young white couple who rushed down to the ground with them. They just didn't seem to be the right kind of people for me to share that spiritual moment with. Next stop, Kotoko Airport, Ghana. No sense trying to sound jaded about it. My heart was beating a hole in my throat. When the plane landed, there are no English words to describe the feeling of being back home if your home is Africa. We can toy around with, I was thrilled, or it was an incredible feeling, a whole bunch of other prosaic exclamations, but none of them will do services for that moment. I was in Ghana and I felt that I belonged there. Despite the humidity, I felt chills running up and down my spine as we walked across the tarmac to the airport terminal. The terminal was filled with chaos. Suddenly, the quiet brothers and sisters who had shared the spaceship from London with me were calling out to their brothers and sisters in languages that had no relationship to my reality. Then the torches tripped through the terminal turnstiles. Why was the man in the ill-fitted uniform barking at us like dogs? Was there a coup or something happening? Did he hate tourists? And where was the line for the diasporans? Finally, suddenly, as though I had been spewed out of a volcanic pimple onto the lava slopes, I was in the mix. The taxi drivers wanted my blood. I chose one who didn't have a patch on his left eye, a hook for a right hand, or a cutlass in his belt. But it really didn't matter all that much. A taxi driver from the airport is a taxi driver from the airport. Where do you want to go, sir? I want to go to Osu. How much will it cost? Osu. Oh, not much, sir. It was obvious that we were going to have problems. Well, what the hell? If you don't expect to have problems, stay at home with your remote in your hand. Mm. I was going to stay with this African-American couple that I had known in L.A. Mm. I didn't know them very well, but they were here. I rolled the window down and felt the funk of Ghana wash over my face. I smelled something that hadn't been washed in a long time. After that night, I made many trips to the airport, smiling at at the perception I had during my first drive from there. The driver soon discovered that he couldn't find where Osu was. I didn't really care, though. I had budgeted a certain amount for him, and if he tried to collect more, we'd do battle in the streets. I grew up in the basements on the west side of Chicago. We do not allow people to chump us out. Oh, sir, I cannot seem to find this place. We had driven past the same collection of people selling things at the side of the road 3 times. I suggested he ask someone for directions. He agreed and drove 16 potholed streets away to pick up a woman I later found out was his girlfriend. I'm going to ask this person, sir. He explained to her in Ga as she buttoned her blouse and brushed her hair that he had this captive American money cow in the back seat and that he wouldn't have to work for the next 5 days if he stroked me correctly. I didn't know it then, but at that point we were just down the road from my destination. The girlfriend then picked up her girlfriend and we were just riding around and around. By this time the neighborhood was hip to the fact that Mr. Taxi had a mark in his back seat. Finally, after we had driven past my destination for the 4th time, the driver decided that enough was enough. Maybe he was running out of gas. I think it is here, sir. The women in the taxi were trying to conceal their amusement, and the driver could barely control his itching palm. Yes, we were in the right place. I could tell from the description I had been given of a green metal gate. We unloaded my 3 pieces of luggage by the side of this dark, murky-looking alley road, and he waited for me to check out the place. There was no one at home. He then quoted some astronomical figure that made both of us laugh. And then we got serious. I had done my homework, and I knew that there was 1,000 cedis to the dollar, and that the trip was going to cost me $10. Plus, my soon-to-be host had given me info about vital stuff like how much the taxi fare was going to be from the airport to their place in Osu. I gave him $10, plus all of the miscellaneous English coins and American dimes I had, and backed away. His blustering was cut short by his lady friend. Come on, Gospel. And that was that. I was in Ghana, and the first person's name I got to know was Gospel.
Okay.
10 heavy minutes later, my friends showed. They had been at a party. They were slightly boozed, especially the brother, and they were so happy to see me. After a year of correspondence, we have a spare room, come on. I was on the scene. We went inside of the cozy little 2-bedroom crib, broke open a 5th of good scotch that I had copped at Heathrow Airport's duty-free shopping center, and toasted the moment.
Off to a good start.
Scotch. After the second round, the brother curled his lips down and in a malevolent slur asked me, so what them niggas doing over there? I almost gagged on my drink. Human, I'd come thousands of miles to Africa to hear a question that any ignorant African-American teenager could have asked on the Blue Line. The brother's wife evaded my distressed look with a clever turn of her head. The first morning, the brother tore my revelry to shreds by announcing that he was going to show me around the town. By 6 that evening, I was sprawled in the rickety chair of an open bar, the 6th or 7th we had tripped through, and I was bored to death. I hadn't come this far with a 90-day visa to blunder from one beer bar to another. It didn't take a genius to determine that I was living in a dysfunctional household. He was an obnoxious, hostile, nasty-talking drunk. And she was the professionally battered woman whom he beat verbally, not physically, by the hour. There was nothing I could do about the scene other than get into my own game. I used my workout as a way to break away. I've been studying the Afro-Brazilian martial art dance called capoeira. And when you study any physically demanding art, you must work out or your body will freeze. I found out where the National Stadium was, and on day 3, hiked through the streets of Osu to the stadium. My third day seemed like my first day. Osu made me think of the raunchiest, most raggedy, most decrepit sections of the West Side in Chicago. The streets were like wide pothole alleys with drains running parallel on each side. There was trash everywhere, and in some places it stank as though fetid gas had been trapped. But to counterattack the ugliness of the chickens scratching through the drains, the goats dropping pellets as they went along, the gutted roads and the trash heaps, there were thousands of gorgeous black people all around me. After an hour of being immersed in the crowds of people selling stuff, buying stuff, calling out to each other, taking baths behind shelters of roadside bricks, and sitting at bars, the stadium loomed up in front of me like a mirage. Oh, a word about drinking in Ghana. All the men drink. All the men drink. Star, Club, and ABC are popular brands of beer. Many women drink too, but they don't seem to do it with the same degree or with the fervency as the men. Men go into their local gin joints, order 3 tots, dribble a few libationary drops on the ground if they're religious, and pour the rest down their gullets like water. Drinking is a part of the culture, but you seldom see a drunk. It's not considered proper to be drunk in public. The drunk in public, the drinks are, in order of status, beer, cheap local gin, and finally, when you're down to a few cities, something called apteshi. Apteshi is like liquid crack. One of the better known brands was called Kill Me Quick. I found my way into the stadium and got into my workout. The Ghanaian Olympic team, track and field team, was shaping up for the Olympics, so it was kind of a treat to do my bit and check out world-class athletes whiz around the track at the same time. I had 2 things to do: work out in the morning before the sun stood up on our heads, and then walk back slowly, unavoidable because of all the distractions, and shower and write till afternoon. The idea was to let the vibe take me, to go with the flow, be flexible, have no agenda. After a few days, I knew where a lot of things were, how to negotiate with the ladies who sell fruit, whatever. Ghanaians have righteously earned the title the friendliest people in West Africa. But there are weird facets to the friendliness. The person who is all smiles one day, giving you an extra banana when you buy from her, may try to cheat you out of 200 cedis the next day. I could only attribute it to the vulnerable state of life. One day the smiles on the face could be wiped off by a strange disease. Life was not a promised item on the menu, so one had to take a fresh chance every day. There was always something unusual happening in Osu. A kind of living theater going on with no determination of the act. The first time I saw a man pause in front of a wall, whip his wood out, and proceed to sprinkle on it didn't stun as much as surprised me, because there were a dozen teenage girls passing by at the moment who didn't pay him any mind. And I was the only one on the road who stared at the young woman with a platter of smoked fish on her head and a baby strapped to her back, who half squatted neatly over a drain deftly pulled the crotch of her panties to one side and relieved her bladder. I discovered that there were some things, like public peeing, that you were not supposed to see, even if you saw them, because what else could a person do? There were no public toilets on every corner. After a couple of weeks, I felt that I knew my way around those too, but I was feeling uneasy about not being able to talk with people in their own language. Everybody spoke some degree of English, but I didn't feel that I was getting into the core things because of the language barrier. When I announced that I was going to start learning Ga, a couple of newfound Ga-speaking friends tilted their heads and stared at me in an odd way. It didn't matter to me. When in Rome, speak as the Romans. I started looking around for a Ga teacher. There are hundreds of proverbs about life in Osu. One of them says, if you want everybody in Ghana to know what you're doing, tell somebody in Osu. A day after I had announced my intention to study Ga, I was on my way to the stadium and passed our house with a high wall around it. I knew it was the home of Papa, a mean, rich old guy who had wild parties from time to time. A woman came outside of the gate as I passed and spoke to me. You are looking for someone to teach you the Ga. I can do it. We decided on afternoons, 5 days a week, beginning tomorrow. Grace Hulivor was Papa's maid, cook, gardener, valet for a salary of $20 a month. $20 a month. And could now add tutor to her title. She lived along with his driver and the driver's wife in a small house, a small room behind the big house. They call these stables boys' quarters, a legacy from British colonial times. The master bedroom even had a buzzer so they could be summoned whenever needed. It didn't take a long time to see that there were two classes in Accra, the rich and the poor. And the rich treat the poor like dirt. If there was a middle class, it was thin as a slice of bologna. The rich people I spoke with, like Papa, seemed to think they were giving the masses a break by allowing them the privilege of working from sunup till sundown. $20 a month.
Yeah.
And many of the poor people have been down so long they can't imagine what it would be like to be treated decently. Grace was a brilliant woman who spoke 6 Ghanaian languages fluently and could get along well in Fulani and Hausa. She didn't think much of her linguistic abilities, though. Most people speak English and 3 other languages. It's a part of the culture, she said. I am Ewe. That is my mother tongue. My husband was Ga, so I had to speak the Ga. I worked for a family that spoke Nzema. Kwame Nkrumah, the first Ghanaian president, spoke Nzema. You know, I went to live amongst the Adangme people for 5 years, so I learned Adangme with Tree. The Akans are all around us, so that is easy. Kongomba, Fulani and Hausa are not sweet for my mouth, but I hear them. I hear them. I came to know them living in Nima, the Muslim section of Accra. The Ga was not coming to my ears or to my mouth very sweetly. It's a tonal language like Yoruba with high, low, and middle tones, and some words that are toneless. I would leave our class exhilarated by a phrase for an expression or an expression that I had mastered. And a half hour later, I wouldn't be able to remember that. What I remembered. I couldn't understand what was happening. I think Grace gave me the best advice. You must wash your head out. You must wash your head out. I understood what she meant, and I made a conscious effort to wash my head out every morning, or at least rinse it real hard. Rinse it real hard. But the Ga was not happening. It had to do with the tones. In some ways, it didn't really matter whether I learned Ga or not. It was a good way to make better friends.
Right.
Casual acquaintances became reservoirs of cultural funding. We would stop in the middle of the road to talk about the meanings of words, the value of life, sip a cold ABC, or discuss America. But by the way, everybody wanted to come to America. A few people want to go to the UK, but everybody wanted to come to America. I think a number of people felt that I was blaspheming when I tried to put America in the proper historical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to talk about the goodies, nothing but the goodies. They didn't want to hear about a black man being beaten like a beast or a prison system that was stuffed with young black men and women. The term racism drifted through my dreams and popped my eyes wide open in the middle of the night. I had been in Ghana about 5 weeks and had not experienced anything that could be called remotely racist. To be continued next month. Now, here we are. It's next month.
Okay.
That's what you can do when you do a moment in time.
When you do a moment in time, gotcha. Mm-hmm.
After 5 weeks, I was feeling quite mellowed out by the Ghanaian vibe. One of my favorite sights was to see little boys and little girls in wash basins at the side of the road, soap from head to toe like living laundry. And then the mother pours the water.
Right, yes indeed. Number 10.
Number 10 tub.
Mm-hmm.
There was no police presence. I sprawled back in bed and laced my hands behind my head, trying to remember when I'd seen a cop. In 5 weeks, I could recall 2 sightings. Once I saw one directing traffic on a box and a white coat and a pith helmet. And the other time I saw a police captain having a beer on the terrace at number 1 bar. However, I had seen evidence of crime. One afternoon, after a particularly torturous guard session, I was walking along Ring Road trying to remember the guard words for water, new, and old man, new. Suddenly, I saw 6 men walking toward me, swinging a naked man between them like a bag of corn. I stood to one side, my eyes bugged out as they passed. The naked man was bleeding and unconscious. One of the men, trailing the possession with a thick stick on his shoulder, said in passing, "This one was caught stealing in the market. We are taking him to jail." I nodded wisely, as though I had really learned something. So this is the way they keep the street crime rate low. Catch them in the act, strip the clothes off, and beat the pudding out of them. This picture is at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center.
All right, let me hold on.
I'm sitting up with some friends, having a conversation, a little chat that went on for hours. W.E.B. Du Bois had a home in Accra that was given to him by Kwame Nkrumah. Wonderful place.
Got you. All right.
Beat the pudding out of him.
Mm-hmm.
The next day, my God teacher, Grace, met me with a surprising question. "Don't you remember me?" I gave my usual blank look, the one that disguised the fact that I couldn't remember how to say chicken. "Your first night in Osu, my girlfriend's boyfriend, Yachpa, collected me as we looked for your friend's house just down the road. We shared a laugh and settled down on the bench behind the big house. Midway through our guard lesson, I began to have a brutal headache, as though a couple of small men in steel-toed brogans were trying to kick their way out of my temples. Oh, I felt disoriented. Grace told me to go home, lay down, and she would come visit me with a medicine later. Mimba. It took me a long time to walk the 150 meters back. The man of the house was out drinking and the lady in the house was cooking. We exchanged neutral nods and I stumbled to my room and curled into a fetal knot. In the center of the bed, now it was freezing. My teeth chattered as sweat poured from my body. The lady of the house passed the screen door of my room and pause long enough to look in and say in a dry monotone, "Looks like you got malaria, huh?" Malaria? Is that what this is? Is that what this is? And all the little men with the steel-toed brogues had invited friends. And my back was beginning to hurt from the hot ice chill that was running up and down my spine. I stuffed the edge of my pillowcase into my mouth to stop my teeth from chattering, but it didn't do much good. I was thirsty, but I didn't want water. My appetite and my joints, all of them, were beginning to throb. Malaria is something most people have never experienced in America. Maybe some in some backwater areas in Florida, the Carolinas, or lower Georgia, but that's about it. It's a common malady in Ghana, and it can kill you. People die every day. In fact, especially babies and young people. Funny thing about malaria, some people just don't seem to get it. They're bitten by the mosquitoes, and they may have a little reaction, but they're not thrown down and stomped. Grace came a few hours later with a bag of funny colored pills. She had also been a nurse at an earlier point in her life. She had me swallow 2 whites immediately and prepared to swallow a few more an hour later. I would have swallowed anything. I wouldn't wish the night that I had on my worst enemy. I had heard about certain types of malaria turning into spinal meningitis, where you just wind up laying there with your head tilted back, staring at the ceiling. Needless to say, I moved my head around as often as I thought about it. I felt much worse the following day. Grace came with more pills in a reassuring manner. "You must not die. If you die, I cannot teach you the God."
It's practical enough.
Figure
and
out.
true.
Figure that out.
Motivation.
I got to stay alive to learn the God. 4 days later, it was like nothing had happened. I had dropped 10 pounds. I had a Jones for sugarcane, but that was it. And that's the way it was for 3 years. I had malaria bi-weekly during the course of some months. During one malaria attack that lasted almost 3 weeks, I took an astral hike. Went swing on swings that swept me from horizon to horizon, and hallucinated about running through a section of town called Adabraka. Bathed in red strobe lights, screaming my paternal great-grandmother's name, my friends started calling me the Malaria King for a while. People can be so sarcastic.
Yes.
"Hey, Malaria King!" I started a capoeira group in Osu. The story goes like this. After a beer and a half at a local bar, my host started doing some hostile interfacing with a very large, dark man who looked like he bent iron bars for a living. Before I realized it, my host, these are the people I was living with, my host had pushed me forward as his champion, explaining to Mr. Musclebound that I was a black belt in Kapawowo, and that I could tear him all up. When a couple of people wanted to know what this Kapawowo was, I tried to explain about it being an African Brazilian martial art. "Oh, it's karate," someone said. This is a martial art that had its roots in Angola, and they'd never heard of it. We went out of the bar, went around to a side where weightlifters had created an outdoor weight room with car parts and rotors, and I was crazy enough to do a few movements in the middle of all of this spiel. The young men decided they wanted to learn how to do it, including Mr. Musclebound, and so it began on Saturdays and Sundays. The class bulged up to 20-something and then settled down to a core of about 8. We didn't get into the music of capoeira, but after a year they were good capoeiristas. A month later, I was writing television scripts for an up-and-coming detective series called Inspector Bediako. Ghana had one television channel called Ghana Broadcasting Corporation. It came on about 6 and went into a color pattern at about 11. Sometime sooner if the unofficial censor was on the case. The sexy scene in the nut house in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is beginning, and suddenly we're staring at colored columns because the censor had decided we didn't need to see that.
Right.
Anyway, one day the lady, the house took me to meet someone who had an idea for a pilot in his head. We clicked, and suddenly I was in the television industry. It can be like that in Ghana. You can get to know important people, do unusual things, and experiment because it isn't a standoffish society. You can strike up a conversation with the minister of blah blah at the country kitchen, the Chinese restaurant on Dankwa Circle, or even in Watson's department store. And there's an advantage of being an African American because they know, despite the fact that they don't want to grant us dual citizenship, that we are the super people of the diaspora. We have the technology and they want to make use of it. Kojo Yanka, the man who came up with the idea for the series, didn't play Hollywood producer with me. He gave me a big black board with Inspector Bediako scribbled at the top and asked me to fill in the spaces. After years of having fistfights and bitter arguments with the criminals who distorted African American images in our media, you all know who you are. I was now being given more creative freedom than I'd ever known. We had an open audition on the grounds of the Ghana Institute of Journalism. I have to smile about the memory of the scene even today. We sat in a big circle, maybe 20 men and women, the best actors and actresses in the country, and I didn't even know who they were. David Dantor, Akuzwa Abdallah, we just heard from her recently.
Yeah.
Adinam Atachi, George Lang, Carol Amabio, Oscar Provençal, the big guy. I did a complete script every other week in between malaria shootouts. Wrote a column for the Ghanaian Voice, taught my capoeira class in Osu, and wrote articles about Africa for 2 Scandinavian publications. I could say with pride that I was earning my living in Ghana. America was very, very far away. I didn't miss Mom's apple pie, the latest major league drug epidemic, psychobabble, cyber psychosis, the rat race, or the uncivilized behavior of ordinary people. Soon I moved into the Fair Gardens Hotel across the road from the Ghana's Trade Fair Center. The local name for the Fair Garden was Mosquito Heaven, but I didn't know that then. I almost died a half dozen times in Mosquito Heaven. The malaria-laden mosquitoes were so brazen that they would assemble in midday to discuss who had dibs on your blood. The shower. You have to go in the shower and,
breeding ground.
and cover yourself with hot water quickly before they got to you. Once we push up through the cosmetic economics of Ghana's government, we realized that the users are still in charge. Ghana celebrated its independence from England in 1957, ending the colonial presence, but like all of Africa below the Sahara, neo-colonialism hovers over the landscape like a vulture. The World Bank and International Money Fund determine Ghana's economic policies, and transnational organizations determine the degree of support, supply, and demand, or how much third world labor is required. But I guess in that sense, it's not too different from the American scene, where the oil cartels, drug producers, cigarettes, alcohol, pills, and the technological advanced determine the country's direction. Bediako was a hit. The show had no violence, no wild chases through the streets, no sexual stuff, none of the standard Western junk emotions that we've become addicted to, if not, we become adjusted to, if not addicted to. It was a highly stimulating half hour of serious logic, and the Ghanaians loved it. I was quite proud of myself. Initially, I had been a ghost, writing and directing anonymously because I didn't have a work permit. And eventually, my name slipped into the credit lines, and that was that. Before I left my former host's home, they introduced me to a woman named Susan Amagashi. Susan Amagashi was the founder of the first Montessori school in Ghana. Her father gave her a big house with suitable grounds in upscale Narbonne and challenged her to do something with it. She did. And her waiting list has, at one point in time or another, up to 2 years long. After Susan dealt with school, people would have begun to arrive. We came from all over the world to her salon. That's what it was. That's what it was. In the intellectually aristocratic sense of the word, it wasn't a stuffy mix of pedantic types who had a symbol to impress each other. I don't think the intellectually scuffy would have lasted a half hour, but fueled by gallons of star beer and honest emotions, the people that showed up tried to resolve problems. It was one of the few private places in the world that I would have paid to get into. That's how stimulating the vibe was. Susan helped me escape mosquito heaven by introducing me to Tom Apantang. Tom was the son of one of the richest men in Ghana. His dad had given him a huge 3-bedroom house. Whoa! In a section called Kanda, just off of Ring Road. Tom was a very complex man. He's burdened with a number of interesting problems. But none of that he ever opened in my face. We arrived at a fair monthly rent, and I left mosquito heaven. Tom lived in a high-ceiling house that faced a beautiful courtyard with a magnolia tree in the center. Tom's half-sister Elizabeth lived in a house on the opposite side. Their father had 8 wives scattered around Ghana. I found out. And at least at the east end of the compound lived Tom's 4 nieces. As each day broke open before the sun rose, I would hear one of the young women swishing the accumulated dust and leaves from the trees away. The soft hum of people going to work would start up, spurred on by roosters crowing. The young women would begin to bathe one after another and would come sit under the magnolia tree to braid their hair or trim their toenails. The 4 of them, Afua, Ya, Akuzwa, and Esi, embodied all of the loveliest traits to be found in an African woman. Afua was the oldest, the most stunningly beautiful, and the shy one. She was black as a black diamond and clever, modest, and cool. It took her a month to look me in the eye when we spoke to each other. Ya, Akuz, and Esi were also quite fine, and they knew it. They flaunted their beauty by changing their lappers to a wraparound dress 3 or 4 times a day and doing incredible stuff to their hair. At least one day a week they would come down under the tree and practice traditional dances. They were Ashantis, so the dances were Ashanti. Sitting on my shaded porch, I felt like a man who had an orchestra seat for a performance of the National Dance Ensemble of Ghana.
How nice.
And always, later in the day, since they were Ashantis, they had to pound fufu for dinner. The Ashantis must have their fufu, and the Gars must have their kinki, the round balls of tamale-like corn wrapped in corn leaves. Fufu is pounded cassava. It is practically tasteless unless it is infused by soup or meat. One dips the right hand into the fufu bowl, rich with swimming bits of fish or whatever, pinches off a wad, and swallows it. I was caught trying to chew fufu once and was informed. One swallows fufu, one does not chew fufu.
Gotcha.
Like chewing jello. I like kinky more because it reminded me of tamales. But somebody was always placing a bowl of something in front of me and saying, Odie, here, try this. I will never forget the day I dipped my hand into a bowl and peeled off a strip of gamey meat that tasted like, well, I couldn't quite figure out what it was like. What is this? It is fresh bush meat. Bush meat.
And fresh bushmeat is?
Bushmeat, someone answered, and I kept on eating. It would have been polite to stop eating, so I finished up. But I had a weird feeling for a couple of days. I found out later that fresh bushmeat was large rat. That's why you probably don't see rats in Ghana. My time in Ghana was coming to an end. I had come on a 90-day visa and had extended it to a year. They wouldn't extend past another month, but I didn't want another month. I wanted a resident permit that would allow me to come and go without being forced to dash everybody all the time. We tried. I put money into so many hands I lost track. I even went to see the Minister of the Interior, but since I was not hauling a valise full of cash like the Lebanese hustler before me, no good. I didn't have anything to cry about though, really. It had been a good run. I had made a few friends and hundreds of acquaintances. An African-American psychologist I knew once told me about an experiment he had monitored many years ago. 40 middle-class black folks had gone to Tunisia to start a new world. The Tunisian government had granted them some land and a nice spot to say, go ahead, go for it, do it. According to my friend, the shrink, within 3 years, 10 of the people had gone crazy because they didn't have any white people to hate. A year later, another 10 had tripped out because they didn't have any white people to love. Mm. And the remaining 20 went cuckoo with ambivalence. I was definitely coming back, that much was certain. During the raggedest, most messed up days and nights in Ghana, I would often find myself praying, thanking my ancestors for granting me the privilege of walking on the continent that our ancestors were taken from. I had neither avoided white people nor sought them out in America. It's just that you are so completely surrounded by them that they're difficult to get away from. A number of African Americans had left America to get away from what the white presence meant. They would not allow whites to dominate their lives, and that if anybody was going to dominate it, they were going to be black, like me. And the beauty of the scene is that in Ghana, your life is dominated by black people. Africans, Ghanaians, the waitress, the shoemaker, the market lady, the shop owner, the taxi driver, the airplane pilot, the president, people like me. Mm-hmm. Well, we went back, Zola and myself, in
2013 and 14.
2013 and 14, before the plague settled in, and had a chance to see what things were like then, and it'll be interesting to see what they're like when we go back.
I see.
I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise.
And I would like to say at this time, that's the beginning of Mimba.
Mimba, moments in time.
Between now and next
Tuesday,
mm-hmm. I'll have to say again, Mimba.
Okay.
Thank you for being here.
This one was a little long. We'll have a shorter one next time. But yes, okay. But we hope you've enjoyed this. Odie Hawkins' website is www.odiehawkins.com. That's O-D-I-E Hawkins.com. And email undergroundmaster_90222 @yahoo.com. The email is on his website. Books can be purchased on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. And again, I hope you enjoyed this moment in time, and yes.
Okay.